Hey guys, welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. Today's video is that Warlock build I've been mentioning over the past few weeks, and I'm really excited to bring it for you today, as it's one of my favorite and most unique builds I think I've ever made. Before we get into it, throughout the entire month of April, myself, along with a bunch of other Destiny 2 content creators, are supporting the American Heart Association, so feel free to stop over on Twitch when I'm streaming and support the cause just by showing up, or any and all donations are greatly appreciated. Thank you in advance, and as always, if you like what you see today, be sure to like and subscribe for more Destiny 2 content like this. Back to the build though, this is one of the best Warmind Cell builds I've ever seen, and in my opinion is the best Warmind Cell build currently in the game. Not only are we auto-procking suppression effects from Warminds through our abilities alone, but it's the only way you can do this in the entire game naturally. No other class in the game can do this, no other subclass in the game can do this other than bottom tree Dawnblade, and it creates one of the funnest and coolest playstyles I think I've ever seen. Starting off, we are on bottom tree Dawnblade, and this is primarily working through igniting touch, which our solar abilities create a burn and explosion effect that can actually trigger Warmind cells to spawn in using a few different mods. And we're going to be taking advantage of this to give a entirely unique interaction as far as Warmind cell builds go. And as far as grenade, you can use really whichever one you prefer. I'm personally using solar grenades because they're one of my favorites, but if you have a preference, you can totally use that. Onto our exotic, and our helmet for today is Dawn Course. What Dawn Course actually does is essentially make our burns last longer and deal more damage, and we gain a small amount of melee energy each time one of our burn abilities actually damages a target. And it's entirely recommended for this build as it increases the duration of the effects of our Warmind cells as well. Our first mod for today is Wrath of Rasputin, which allows our solar splash damage final blows a chance to generate a Warmind cell. This completely bypasses the need from using Aikilos weapons, although you can totally still use that and just make this build even stronger. This is absolutely essential for this build, as it's what enables our abilities and our super to actually spawn Warmind cells in the first place, and bypasses our need to use an Aikilos or 7 Seraph weapon, although you can totally still use them and increase the overall potency of spawning Warmind cells if you wanted to. I'm also using Kinetic Siphon and Solar Siphon. Kinetic Siphon allows any rapid kinetic weapon final blow to create an orb of power, and Solar Siphon allows any solar rapid weapon final blows to create an orb of power as well. And of course, if you're using a solar kinetic weapon, these stack doubly on that and enable even more orb generation. This is more or less a quality of life kind of deal rather than anything in particular. We are going to be using class mods that actually benefit from picking up these orbs. However, if you want to use something like Ashes to Assets and get more super energy from your grenade kills, or if you want to use like ammo finders to support your weapons, you can totally use that too. For our gauntlets today, we're using Global Reach, which is a 3-cost mod. Its range is not as significant as it used to be before its major nerf. However, it's still pretty much required on any Warmind cell build just because of how important that range actually is. I'm also stacking it with momentum transfers just because causing damage with our grenade then reduces our melee cooldown, and of course with that solar grenade we're going to be getting a ton of damage ticks, which means if we have a few enemies that are damaged by our grenade, this combined with the natural intrinsic regeneration of our melee through burn damage is going to get us our melee charge back really quickly. Onto our chest piece is Explosive Wellmaker. In short, Explosive Wellmaker allows explosive damage final blows to spawn solar wells for us. And this is really great because not only does this proc through various weapons that we're going to be using, but also our abilities and our super. So we're effectively always going to be having these spawn. And as far as chest piece goes, I'm just rocking 2 thermoshock platings just because, you know, double damage resistance is definitely really appreciated anywhere we go. However, if you wanted to rock dual reserves, you could totally do that too. Onto our boots for today is Well of Ordnance. Essentially, picking up a solar elemental well grants us more grenade energy. Again, a really nice way to help benefit both of our abilities. In short, we're using our grenade and our melee to generate burn and explosive final blows, which grant us wells as well as melee energy intrinsically. Picking up these wells then allows us to get our grenade back, which again, our grenade entirely separately from our intrinsic regen gives us energy back from momentum transfer. I'm also rocking Absolution, which reduces all ability cooldowns each time we pick up an orb of power, as well as Innervation, which reduces our grenade cooldown specifically when we pick up an orb of power. Again, benefiting from those siphon mods. However, if you want to rock Scavengers and benefit a lot more into your weapons, you could totally do that instead. Finally, onto our mark, we're using Cellular Suppression. Whenever we damage a Warmind cell, it creates a burst of suppressing void energy. In my opinion, this is one of the best utility mods in the entire game, but it's often very awkward to use because you have to play around Warmind cells in order to get the most out of it, because you're constantly having to refer to shooting them or dealing damage to them to actually have them proc. This build effectively bypasses that entirely and just lets you use whatever you want to use and just have this always go on in the background. And then of course distribution, just giving us all of our ability energy back whenever we use our class ability near targets. So as you can see from this in the background gameplay, what's actually happening here is really interesting. So whenever we get a solar ability or super final blow, it's putting the burn effect on the Warmind cell, and that is self-procking suppression of the Warmind, which suppresses nearby enemies. A few quick notes. Suppression of the Warmind, through my testing, does not intrinsically work with Void 3.0. I don't know if this was an oversight, I don't know if this is intentional, but stuff like Suppression Mastery or stuff like Energy Vampirism does not work with this suppression effect, at least from my testing. And I've tried it on multiple characters, I've tried it with multiple different effects of this going on. For whatever reason, it doesn't work. So I believe the suppression effect, even though it says it's Void, is separate from Void 3.0's intrinsic suppression. And on to what's more relevant to the build, this is the only case in the entire game that enables abilities to auto-proc these Warmind Cell effects. This doesn't work on any Hammer version on Titan. This doesn't work on any Solar version of Hunter, although with Titan, you have to spend your melee charge in order to actually burn the Warmind Cell, but it's really counterproductive because you're wasting one of the primary ways you spawn a sunspot, so it really doesn't work properly. This is the only case, however, where your ability kills naturally will cause this to go to a Warmind Cell. Everything else, you have to deliberately deal damage, and even again with the burn effect from Titan, you have to waste an entire ability in order just to get this to proc. This is naturally occurring from getting an ability kill and works entirely separate of your cooldowns. What this effectively means is that with your super or with any of your abilities, if you get a kill with it and spawn that Warmind Cell, along with everything else we're doing with wells in the build, that Warmind Cell for its near entire duration will be constantly suppressing enemies within that field. If you want to rock something like Power of the Warmind and make it so that enemies then have increased damage dealt to them by you when they're nearby and being suppressed, you can totally do that. But you can see what I mean when I say this build is really unique, because I'm not sure if this interaction is really even intentional, as again, it's the only one that naturally occurs in the game without any kind of alternate mechanic or intention going on damaging the Warmind Cell. This just happens all by itself. And as you can see, not only is it great at suppressing large groups of ads, but also just the burn abilities and chaining is incredibly effective and really satisfying to watch happen to a big group of ads. As far as weapons go, you can really use whatever it is that best suits the playstyle and which direction you want to go with this build. Like I said earlier, if you wanted to use like an Aikilos weapon or a 7th Seraph weapon, you can totally do that and spec more into the Warmind aspect of it. Or if you wanted to go into the more ability focused aspect and use something like Traveler's Chosen, for example, or even Bad Juju and get your super back really, really quickly, you can totally do that. What I found to be the nice center between those two options is what I'm using today, which the first is Heritage, which has the Reconstruction Recombination roll just for good boss DPS and also really good single target DPS. And to support the overall fluency of this build, I'm also rocking Tiku's Divination. This can also be swapped out with Sunshot, however I'm really liking Tiku's recently, so I'm going with that. This not only can also spawn those explosive wells that we were talking about earlier, but also Warmind Cells through these solar splash final blows. Now, of course, the Warmind Cells that we spawn through our weapons won't intrinsically have this burn on it, but again, if you use your melee charge, you can actually start burning it directly. However, it won't have the suppression effect from the weapon itself, so you do need to apply it if you spawn it from this source. But like I said, Tiku's is a great option. Something like Sunshot is also a really good option. Basically, any nice solar weapon that excels in ad clear and creating explosions, really good choice. And finally, I'm using Ascendancy. This is just a really great ad clear, especially with the explosive light buff that it got in the last season. This is a really good rocket launcher overall, especially with the explosive light change last season. It makes this thing definitely hit way harder and is a really good fit for this build because it can also spawn Warmind Cells. However, if you wanted to use something more close range, say Solar Scar, which can actually roll with chain reaction and generate a ton of explosive damage and explosive kills, generating a ton of Warmind Cells in turn, you can totally use something like that. But again, anything that works really well with solar final blows or solar damage in general is really appreciated with this build. And like I said, if you wanted to lean more into the weapon aspect of this build, you can totally rock something like Font of Might and generate more damage for your solar weapons alongside of all these other abilities going on. But that's really it for today, guys. Like I said, this build is incredibly unique. It's not something that is a boss killer DPS machine, but it's one of the best ad management and control builds I've ever seen. Again, I'm not really sure if this is intended to be this way or if this interaction is specified at all, because again, Warmind Cells don't really synergize well with Void 3.0 when suppression effects, so I'm not sure if this is really intentional on Bungie's side. But as far as I know, it's incredibly potent and I can't not make a video on this. So let me know what you guys thought of the build down below, as well as any comments, future build guides. Again, this was incredibly unique, and I'm trying to focus more on unique builds rather than just overall potency, because I feel something like this is one of my favorite Warlock builds I've ever done and ever personally used. But again, let me know what you thought of the video down below, as well as suggestions for future videos. Be sure to like and subscribe for more Destiny 2 content like this. and I'll catch you in the next one.